It seems that in modern society, the most common currency is hate. It's easy to express. It doesn't need any factual basis. It's enough that other people agree, regardless of who they might be. Multipliers are facilitators, and if they so happen to be distasteful, racist, fascist, genocide deniers, then well, so be it. I can't be blamed for who supports me. Well, if you have opinions that fascists support, there is a good chance that your opinions are questionable at best. Having your comments liked by fascists should raise alarms, and I'm looking at Labour Party HQ when I say that as well. This episode is about the disgusting treatment of the trans in LGBTQIA+. In Germany, the extreme right AfD, as it has been classified by a government report, have voiced their support for the LGB, but not the T. This is a party that allows Nazis to remain as leaders within it. This is a party that has fascist policies. This is a party that worryingly received over 20% of the German vote at the last election, despite the policies it held that would have impoverished the poorest German families. Go figure. Alex talks to me chiefly about the situation in the UK. We discuss the decision of the UK Supreme Court and touch on the Cass review. There are thousands of trans women, in particular, who are scared and confused right now, and for no fault of their own. They have been victimized, vilified, and accused of crimes they have not committed. There is no justice in discrimination. Thank you, Alex, for your courage and directness, and for taking the time to talk with me. This is Two and a Mic. Rise up and be curious.
Dung weche pek kod welo mabiro e Two and a Mic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye Two and a Mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji e Two and a Mic. Wola wachokre wabed piny bi wawinje ero chako momit ndi Two and a Mic podcast makende.
I'm very happy to say that I'm joined by Alex in the UK. Alex, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. As far as these turbulent times allow, at any rate.
Yes, indeed. Yes. And you are here because, thankfully, a mutual friend of ours put us into contact with one another, especially as for a long time, I've always kind of prided myself on being a very small podcast channel that wants to be representative of as many different diverse voices as possible. And one particular category of individuals within society had not been represented until now, and that is the LGBTQ community. So therefore, would you be able to introduce what your relationship is with this community?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've already mentioned, I'm Alex, and I'm a Gen X non-binary trash heap. That's usually how I refer to myself. Living in the murky depths of Yorkshire with my dog. Although I say murky, but somebody's left the sky on, so it's quite bright. But yeah, I'm a non-binary person, which comes under the trans umbrella for anybody who doesn't already know that. And I'm going to sit here and talk, if that's okay.
Wonderful. It definitely makes my life easier because I'm happy to sit here and listen. You mentioned earlier there have been some turbulent times, and one of the main topics that we wanted to address was how the hell we got here.
Yeah. And it's not something that's happened overnight. Now, because I'm part of a small community which intersects with other demographics, as they all do, not a lot of people actually pay attention to what's going on unless something significant happens, maybe something controversial or something like that. And fairly recently, on the 16th of April this year, something happened that sent us into a bit of a panic. and that was the fact that the Supreme Court ruled that trans women aren't women. So I am going to read you a little bit of text from a very, very excellent website called Queer AF. I'll give you some links later to put all this with the podcast, because obviously it will be helpful.
Thank you.
Just to read out what this definition is, and then I can go into how we got there. So the TLDR version of it, which was provided by Jesso Thompson of Queer AF, or rather I borrowed it. The legal definition of a woman in the UK now excludes trans people after a Supreme Court ruling defines sex as biological sex, that is, sex assigned at birth. The ruling will have a devastating impact on trans plus rights in the UK and has already drastically reduced them. Trans people now can't make equal pay claims and can be excluded from all single-sex spaces under any circumstances. So that sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but there are resources out there that people can read for more information on that section. What I want to do today is address what got us to this point in time, because it's not something, like I said, it's not something that's happened overnight, and it doesn't just affect trans women, which is what most people thought it would do. It also affects trans men, it affects non-binary people, it affects intersex people, and I don't think people have realised just how much of a disaster that is for this community. So it will also affect people that don't fall into white Western beauty standards. They might find themselves challenged in public for any number of reasons, and some of the groups of people that could be affected by it are, for example, breast cancer patients if they've had a double mastectomy, menopausal people, and as somebody who is smack bang in the middle of perimenopause, I can tell you that we grow an alarming amount of hair in places where they previously weren't. On the face, anything like that, you know, and if we are seen as anything that might look even remotely masculine, we could be challenged. And then you have members of the lesbian community, if you have butch presenting lesbians, they very well may be challenged as well. So it doesn't just affect the trans community. This is something that affects everybody. But again, they didn't think about that when this got through. And so now we move on to, how does this affect us in public spaces and workplaces? Because it's not just about toilets. If you are a trans or non-binary person in a workplace, you might not necessarily be out to people in that workplace, okay? Or you may only be out to your boss, for example, and not to everybody else. There's different variables there. And it might not be safe for you to come out, right? Or if you do come out, I mean, you might come out and it might be wonderful. I genuinely hope that is the case, but it might not be. So it's not necessarily going to be safe for people at work. The possibility for people to work from home is there, but at the same time, why should people have to do that? And also, people might want to be around people at work. It might be better for them on a social point of view, you know what I mean? It's some people really need to be around other people, and then being told, right, okay, you need to stay at home and work from home now because of who you are. And that's like, okay, which century are we in again?
And that's also to completely overlook associated mental health issues. I mean, once somebody begins to isolate under the belief that doing so makes them essentially safer, at what point is it no longer necessary for them to isolate in that case? Is it, as in, people may decide, you know what, that's it, I'm done now. I'm just staying here.
Yeah. Essentially what this comes down to is that they don't want us to leave the house. That's what it's always been about. You either stay indoors and be who you are, or you go out and risk being challenged. If you go into a public space where you might need to use a bathroom or at work, where you know, as I say, you might be challenged or it might not be safe for you. So unless people know that they can go to work and go out in public and be safe, then they have to make a decision as like, what do I do? Do I stay indoors, or do I think, no, I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna do it anyway. Because I have seen so many of us have been saying, F this. I'm going out. I will continue to use the bathroom I've always used, and they can all fuck off. Words to that effect. That was not a quote. That's just like a collective. It was a collective attitude that I was saying. I'm like, good. But it's like, well, okay. So going back to the workplace issue, it's like, well, even if everything turns out to be safe, does it mean that they're now going to start centering things around you being a member of the trans and non-binary community, and then maybe try and find a way to ease you out because your presence makes things a little bit more difficult? Or maybe it is massively unsafe for you there, so you think, right, okay, what can I do now? They surely can't get rid of me because of me being a trans person. And you would like to say no, but we know what some organizations are like, and they will find a way to push people out. And so there's going to be that to deal with. And then, of course, what do they do next? They need to find another job. And then they might suddenly find it's difficult for them to be hired because of who they are. So what do they do? Do they say they aren't trans on any application? What do they do? And it's like, these people just don't, they just don't want us to be out in public around it all. It's like, no, you stay in your own little lane, and then that's it. We don't care. But these people are human beings. I am a human being. Yeah. So at what point do we begin to matter?
Well, this is the fundamental issue, which seems to have been completely neglected in all of these debates and in all of the online threads that I've seen, the arguments, the toing and froing and so on, is that people fail to recognize the fact that people can be of any essential gender that they feel that they conform to, but they're still human beings.
Yeah.
And the idea of out of sight, out of mind, or whatever particular logic they're trying to enlist in this case, cannot simply be explained away in any way. I have never understood why the LGBTQ community is considered a threat when the history of sexual abuse against women throughout history has been mainly the fault of men. And yet here we have a profound argument being placed against a group of society or within society that have very rarely been accused of these kinds of violent crimes. So where does this hate come from for the T in the LGBT community?
A lot of it comes down to patriarchy, to be honest with you. It's like, they other us. We are othered, we're not. For some reason, just wanting to be who we are and whatever that entails as a person is deeply offensive to patriarchy. And it's just like, well, we're not a threat to you. And as with any other demographic that exists, of course, there are people within our communities that might be problematic. But the same is said for every single demographic that exists. There are no demographics that exist that don't have people inside them that have negative behaviors. We're human beings, and that is everything that it means to be a human being. And because we're so othered by patriarchy, and everything is basically reliant on patriarchy at the moment, and has been since forever, we don't fit into the mold of what patriarchy upholds and what it wants to create. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it isn't just patriarchy. There's much more to that, but social and cultural norms all over the world have people like us in them, even though people might argue otherwise. We have existed since forever in every corner of the world. Although some would argue here in the West, they'd say, oh no, well, it's just a trend, you know, it's just something that we've picked up from other parts of the world. It's not, you're not real. It's, you know, these things are made up. And you can't be trans. You are who you are. You're born that way. That's just the way it is. And it's like, wow, okay. Have you ever read a history book in your life? And the answer is usually no, they haven't.
Not one that hasn't been doctored by the patriarchy, at least.
Oh God, don't get me started. I mean, I've unfortunately had to read books and essays and magazines that are written by people that I don't particularly want to read, but I can't accurately make commentary about anything or any of them unless I've read what they've had to say. And some of the things are just outright ridiculous. I won't get into that now because that will be a tangent that's absolutely gigantic. But I found it, all of that. I spent an entire summer reading through various materials and sitting under trees and doing it and swearing out loud and forgetting I was in public and thinking, no, I should probably keep that inside my head rather than outside my head. And then that's when I, you know, learned very much about the people that hate us the most, which are the TERFs. And they hate us calling them that. They'll argue that it's a slur, and I'm like, give over, it's not a slur. And they don't like being called cis either. They'll have temper tantrums to infinity and beyond if you know, call them a TERF or cis. And I'm like, I wish that was the only thing that I had to worry about, but it's not. So unless there's anything else you want to ask me before I get into it, I'm going to start going into the why we got here now.
Just quickly, because I think it's important also to kind of try to understand in some way the lack of rationale behind the way that, especially the TERFs, TERF, because I've also come across TERFs with TIRF, which are trans inclusive radical feminists, so the absolute opposite of the TE community. But it's that the complete negation of history. So I mean, for example, because we talk about patriarchy, and I read a book called The Curious History of Sex, and I forget currently the name of the author because I'm terrible with names. And she was talking about how in medical books, for example, for a long time, the female orgasm was discovered by a male doctor. Yeah, this is how it was included in medical journals. Yeah, and obviously now we'd think about that, or we'd listen to that or hear that and think, 1 minute, how on earth could a man have been the first person to discover the female orgasm? Surely at some point in history, a female would perhaps have encountered one before this individual happened along. Yeah, clearly that you would have thought that, right?
Yeah, you would have thought so, but there's this thing where blokes take credit for things that they ought not to do.
Yeah.
And that's happened throughout history. You know, you look at history, any kind of medical, any terminology whatsoever is usually attributed to a white bloke with money, or somebody who was an absolute genius during his time but was dirt poor, and then, you know, came to fame after he passed away. It's usually, you know, an older bloke, usually white.
Yeah, unfortunately, history has had this kind of plot continuously played out in many different ways. The thing which I find difficult to understand is women know this better than most in many, many different ways. And it's been proven to so many different generations of women over and over and over. So why is it that some influential women, and I don't necessarily have to name names, people can work out who they are. Why is it some influential women completely ignore all of the experience that has been brought down through the generations as to who, not necessarily the enemy is, but the system?
Yeah.
It's the system which needs the attention. If we want to achieve real gender equality, it's the system which we should focus on, and not the threatened minorities. And this is the I find most difficult with the TERFs, the TERF, within the debate.
Well, this is the thing. There are subsets within patriarchy, and there is another subset that you don't hear talked about very often, It's something called kyriarchy. Starts with a K. And the thing is, women within our different demographics, and I say our different demographics because if people were to look at me, they would probably assume that I'm a woman. So from a privileged point of view, I will talk from that point of view. White women still want control. They still like to have control over other demographics, whether it's consciously or not. They still like the control. And this control tends to find itself in middle class white feminists over the age of 40. Certainly in this particular area. That is not to say that there aren't other people involved in TERFdom that don't fit that description. There are some men involved as well. One is an ex-TV writer. I will not mention his name because he doesn't deserve the airtime. But unfortunately, even under patriarchy, women who have been accustomed to a certain level of privilege within society still like to hold that over other women's heads and people around those demographics. So you've got your trans people, your non-binary people, sex workers, disabled people. And with every single demographic, you've got people from ethnically diverse backgrounds who automatically get it so much worse than white people that are marginalized within white spaces. I hope that made sense. It made sense in my head. But it's all about control. So the TERFs are not happy about the presence of trans people, however minute a part of the population that we are. And they absolutely refuse to see trans people for what they are and assume that we're all men that want to go and hide in bathrooms and do terrible things to women and girls. And I'm like, well, no, not really. We wouldn't choose to be this way. And for men to do things to women in spaces like that, they certainly don't need to be dressing up to do it. It doesn't matter. They are not going to care about what they're wearing. They just want to go in and do whatever it is that they're going to do. So that argument it's just so far from making any sense, you know?
Yeah.
But the phrase that I mentioned before, kyriarchy, it's kind of, I'd say it's like a step below patriarchy. At least that's where I've recognized it to be. And it's people like a very, very prolific author with a massive platform has positioned themselves and started to kind of govern over people who follow their view, which is where this started. So I'd say this probably kicked off about 12 years ago. So like I said, it's within, like over this like a little bit more than a decade, but it's not like far, far away in history, and it's not more recent than that. And it started slowly. That was when I learned what a TERF was. And so for people that don't know, it's trans exclusionary radical feminist. And it often intersects with the sex work contingent of things, because trans people and sex workers often fight side by side because we're the only people that listen and notice each other. Yeah, if that makes sense. And a lot of TERFs are also anti-sex work. But that's a conversation for another time. I'm happy to talk about that as well, but I'd rather, not right now.
Sure.
Okay, so there was a group of, well, I think probably what refers to as media femmes, and that's probably not in a positive light, and so they were discussing trans people and, how they thought they were all men in dresses and that sort of thing. And I encountered them through my talking to other people in the trans and non-binary community online on Twitter, because it was Twitter back then. Now, obviously there are collectives of people that use other, different social media platforms, but Twitter was where I was at the time. And I was also aware that the same people that were active on Twitter in the TERF community were also probably very active on Mumsnet, which is, I think, probably TERF headquarters, if I'm honest. They do have a couple of offshoot sites that exist, but I think that because it's like an original stomping ground for a lot of the women, that's TERF HQ, whether or not it's morphed into something else, if that makes sense. And we went through what was called the TERF wars, although to be honest with you, as you can see, they haven't ended at all. And it was horrible, really, really nasty. And people have died because of it, because of the hate that TERFs actually stir. Now, it got worse at a certain point because of a certain person, again, who I shall not name. And that person, extremely wealthy, gigantic platform. I think right now it's in the millions, like seriously huge platform. And started behaving a little bit oddly, making mistakes, apparently mistakenly liked a tweet that was transphobic. And I'm like, okay, what tweet is that? And it was one about trans women being men in dresses. And they weren't quite as active as usual. I think they were watching and seeing what was going on, if you see what I mean, like observing more than interacting.
Mm.
And then this person started to fund campaigns that were either belonging to TERFs and this includes prosecution or, work-based issues, stuff like that. And they started to fund them. And then at one point, they just came straight out and started using deeply offensive language referring to trans genitalia. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, you are not holding back anymore. You've come out all guns blazing, so to speak.
Mm.
And of course, the moment they said that and other things along the lines of like, wear whatever you like, but, it's just, you are what you are. The exposure was explosive. Like I said, they had millions of followers and they still do, but the hatred driven at the community was catastrophic. A lot of trans people have died, and that's not an exaggeration. And, that's not something new either. Trans people have been victims of deadly violence for so long, over so many years, and it's still going on now. When I started noticing this happen, not long after that, there was a girl called Leela Alcorn. She was 17 years old in 2014. She committed suicide because her parents were so deeply religious and anti-trans that they refused to recognize her or acknowledge her. There's a lot to her story that I'm not going to go into because, again, it's a tangent. But she was 17 when she took her own life, and her parents buried her under her dead name as a boy because they hated her that much for that. But she was only 17 years old, and we found out about that via a Tumblr post. She announced what she was going to do. It was a case of, if you are reading this, this means that I am no longer with you, words to that effect. And that was in 2014. And in 2023, a 16-year-old girl, Brianna Jai, was murdered by two kids from school. Now, and these are only two notable examples. There are people that have been killed. There are people that have taken their own lives, and they are overwhelmingly from trans people from ethnically diverse backgrounds. Overwhelmingly. So this affects them so much more than it does white trans people. And it always will, because of the sheer amount of racism and fascism that exists in the world. There's no getting away from it. We can see it all up close in real time now. Everybody can see right now how absolutely screwed everything is. There's no hiding from it.
It's important that you mention right wing, I think, because I believe that to be one of the main contributory factors, because the first time I recall any kind of debate about this, I was still living in Italy, and there was a very prominent a woman within the political establishment of Italy. She was the granddaughter of a former leader, and she was being interviewed, and the main topic of this particular discussion in itself was the prominence of transsexuals and how so many, I believe at the time, either prominent or well-known men were having relationships or were pursuing sex workers of a transsexual inclination rather than women. It had become a sexual preference within a certain group in Italy at the time, and it had become so rather prominently, so much so that this debate was taking place with this extremely well-known politician, and she came out being the fascist or extreme right-wing person that she was, saying, yeah, this is unacceptable. Us women, look at us, we are beautiful. Nobody can replace us. And what is happening? Is this another question of men not having enough character because women have become so much more forceful and independent and strong, as it were? And this was the kind of debate that was happening. And the thing is, I mean, I was never necessarily so involved in these kinds of topics. So I just listened to it, and I kind of, I bookmarked it and left it to my memory and just saw how things would play out thereafter. But seeing how these kinds of right-wing thoughts and ideologies have spread from one country to another, it kind of ties in with what you were saying before, and what I also believe to be the patriarchal system and the people who want to adhere to that patriarchal system. And if you have privileged women who have managed in some way to create a platform for themselves, it seems to be for them in their interest in some way to support that right-wing establishment belief. And seeing as the trans community is so small, for them, well, it's not much of a loss, it seems.
Going back to you mentioning prolific men that are hooking up with trans people or sex workers who are trans, they're chasers. That's how they would be referred to, I believe, unless that terminology has changed, because it may have. But, they will, behind closed doors, pursue trans people for sex or an affair, and insist that they are completely accepting of trans people, but will not admit that they have a preference for trans people. And most of it is that they like them, they have a fetish for them, but they don't want to admit it because they would be seen as queer in front of other men because of patriarchy. And more often than not, the men that very often go and seek out trans sex workers are married and have kids and have high-paid jobs. And I think as the younger generations refer to them as freaks, like they like all kinds of different fetishes, and trans people come up as one of them. And that's another conversation as well, all by itself.
Sure.
But they are happy to fetishize the trans community and everyone and everything inside it, but they don't want to be publicly seen as doing it. For younger people, it's more acceptable to come out and be openly pansexual, bisexual, whatever sexuality you are. But there are so many older men with money that are still doing things behind closed doors because they feel threatened by it. They don't want to lose their marriage. They don't want to be humiliated. They don't want to lose a job. They don't want to be seen as, oh no, we can't do that, it's gay. Like, what? We should be way past that by now, but we're not. Like, this is all very Section 28, which was Margaret Thatcher's doing in 1988, which was basically to say that you don't promote homosexuality publicly. You don't promote the ideas of it. You don't practice it. You don't talk about it in schools. It's that all over again. And that it's all linked. But that's the thing. when you start displaying attitudes that are anti-trans, and because trans people, whether some people within our own community like it or not, are part of the LGBTQIA plus community. Okay, they are part. Forgive me, I sometimes say they because the way that I see myself as a person doesn't necessarily fit in because I'm non-binary. So sometimes they, other people across the board, because it's neutral.
True.
But a lot of the anti-LGBTQ people are far-right organisations, or not necessarily far-right, right-wing ones. If they're pro-family, it's not just usually about trans people, it's about anybody who isn't straight. So it will be lesbians, gay people, bisexual people, asexual. And that's another point that was raised recently with asexuality. The same famous person that made all of this explode also went after asexual people recently. And I'm like, really? That's what you're going to do with your time? Anyway, I digress. The religious right, and not necessarily even the religious right, the religious left, because this isn't just on the right side of things, on the right wing side of things. There are some deeply transphobic people in left spaces. And I am on the fringes of a lot of communities because I tend to stand back and observe, to watch how things have changed, and I've been able to do that over the last 12 years, watching this unfold. And it is staggering to me how many transphobic people exist in leftist spaces. So I don't trust anybody across the board.
Just being a socialist does not necessarily mean that somebody does not have these kinds of prejudicial opinions. Unfortunately, I'm a socialist, so I always find it quite surprising when I see right-wing people, you're typical left, you like this, and this. And unfortunately, I say, I might like this, and this, but a lot of other socialists don't. So don't put us all in the same boat, mate.
Yeah. No, it's like, and the thing is, when groups come together like that, so like I said, the religious right took notice of when that famous author boosted things and it exploded, and started to think, oh, maybe we can kind of like offer our support in that way. And then you'd also get religious people on the left doing the same, or just not necessarily even religious people. Like I just want to make it absolutely clear, I am not sitting on religion here. It's just that there are religious people that are problematic, unfortunately.
And traditionalists and established people, and
conservatives, anything. There are so many different classifications now on either side of the debate, but it would be impossible to list them all. But unfortunately, there were politicians as well that picked up on this. So the religious and the political groups often go hand in hand, and because this person's exposure was seen across the pond in America, things exploded even more. And then the political right over there started to talk about it. Politicians were seeing it as engagement bait and a point for them to run on a platform with. Like, oh, we're not really concerned about women. We're not really concerned about the worries that feminists might have. But we do hate trans people, and we also hate gay people, and we hate lesbians, and we hate all of them. So we're just going to jump onto this bandwagon and fuel it, you name it, they did it. And it's been weaponized for political and monetary gain on both a business and a personal level, from what I can see. It's resulted in hate groups being formed, like in recent years, for example, Libs of TikTok is, seriously poisonous organization, and that's come to, they've literally been running on hatred for trans people. Like, it is venomous on a level that I didn't think I'd ever see. And then you have people who, a certain oligarch who bought a social media platform recently to turn it into a propaganda hate machine.
And I believe one such oligarch has a child who we may be talking about a similar kind of person.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that it's literally for everything that isn't fascist and racist, that particular social media site is a propaganda hate machine. There is no two ways of putting it. That's what it is. And he loves TERFs as well, you know, because of a certain person apparently being infected with the woke mind virus, which is a ridiculous thing to say, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the number of people that simply refuse to learn what the meaning of the word woke is. Anyway, we can't continuously educate these people. They refuse. That's it. It's unfortunate.
And so, because everything exploded on the world stage as it does, and Twitter being the machine that it is, it just magnified so much. It went supernova. It's the only way that I can really describe it. And so it's created factions of people who are joining together for one purpose only. So it means you've got people like neo-Nazis were literally standing next to another TERF and chanting the same stuff. Like, if you are standing next to a neo-Nazi at a campaign, there's something incredibly wrong with your beliefs. There's something incredibly wrong with that. And it was like, oh, well, we don't care because they're giving us a platform. It's like, but look at the platform they're giving you. What on what part of the planet do you think that is all right? You know? And so, of course, it's been used to fuel hatred for anything that is outside that nasty little circle. And it's brought other TERFs out of hiding that were in the woodwork, that were afraid to speak up before, and painfully other queer folks within our own community.
People really have to try to overcome this compulsion that they feel when somebody agrees with me on a very important topic. That means I have to agree with them with everything. As in, I've been talking, being of Armenian ethnic origin, I've been talking about the ethnic cleansing that occurred in Karabakh, which the Azerbaijanis did with the Armenians, and somebody else followed me, and because that person believed strongly in what I was saying, and I followed this person back, and we would support each other online in our arguments. But then one day I saw this person communicate an anti-trans message, and I simply thought, okay, we agree on this other topic, which is very important, but I cannot, in good conscience, continue to follow you because I cannot be associated with that kind of an opinion. So, you know, okay, unfollowing. So, okay, who gives a shit? You unfollowed them. But the point is that given a choice, would you stand on a stage with somebody who 10 years ago you would have thrown stones at just because on this one particular point you feel it serves your purposes? And that kind of one-dimensional thinking will get us nowhere as a society.
No, it won't. And it's like, they will often come and say, well, you know, I've got friends with from all kinds of backgrounds with different opinions, and we're still friends even though we disagree on some things. And I'm like, there are certain things you do not and you cannot disagree with, you know, and, you know, people's humanity, who they are, their sexual identity, their gender identity. There are so many reasons not to agree with somebody, and you can carry on being friends with them, but these ones you cannot. And it is heartbreaking when you see somebody who you have previously absolutely adored come out and say, oh, you know, trans people are men in dresses, non-binary people don't exist. I don't know what an intersex person is. That's not me saying that, that's what they would say. And trans men are just confused lesbians. Because these are all the kind of like phrases that they come out with. It's ridiculous.
It's because it's easy, isn't it? It's like calling every mass shooter or every serial killer something sick in the head. Because that's how it's easier for them to deal with it in that way. They don't want to go into the fundamental issues. They don't want to go into perhaps the years and years of childhood abuse and sexual abuse that these people may have encountered. Not necessarily that's the case always, of course. But you need to make an effort to try to understand what is the situation. Why are people different? Why do they behave differently? Why do they look different? Or why do they express themselves in a different way to what perhaps you would have noticed necessarily if you saw them walking down the street? And they just have, unfortunately, a fundamental problem with that.
What it comes down to is that they just don't see the trans and non-binary people as human beings. We're important to them in the sense that they're happy to weaponize us, because hating us can make them money and get them political power, but they don't see us as human beings. We're just like pawns to them, essentially. The result of all of this happening, all these horrific communities coming together with one cause, has now created a massive hate machine with serious celebrity and political connections that can affect devastating changes to UK legislation, and has then gone on to affect the same overseas, like in America, like the cash review.
Well, hate travels, right? Unfortunately,
it does, and it's exploded. And now, because of that very prolific author, it has grown so much because they have such a massive platform. We didn't stand a chance. We didn't stand a chance. And there's a beacon of hope in all this, because the trans and non-binary community do know how to organise. They know how to fight. They do it brilliantly. And there is also a former High Court judge who is joining the fight and wants to take the Supreme Court to the European Court for Human Rights. And I honestly, and this is ignorance on my own part, I didn't even know that she existed as a person. When I found out that there was a trans judge, I was elated. I thought, this is fucking fantastic, you know? And she's standing up and she's, no, we're going to take the Supreme Court to the European Court for Human Rights. And so, but this is what it's come to. This is what has to happen. Just because people are threatened by a small demographic of people who just genuinely want to live their lives. Because when it comes down to it, the TERF involvement is that they see trans women as men and trans men as confused lesbians, because they always use that term. And I'm like, okay, so you see trans women as men, but shouldn't you, like, there are an awful lot of people that are actually men, cis men, causing major problems all over the world. I mean, just look out of the window right now. Power hungry, warmongering men are a fucking problem, aren't they? And I'm like, why aren't you diverting all of this action in their direction? Because if you could just get a grip on yourselves and realize that we're not here to cause you any harm, if you could just stop terrorizing us, because to me, these people are terrorists to me. I may very well get yelled at for saying that, but I don't give a shit. They are terrorizing the trans community as a whole. And it's terrifying for so many people. And publicly, for every person who stood up and they're fighting back and they're not taking it behind closed doors, they are absolutely fucking terrified.
I have a lesbian friend. I asked her if she would want to come and talk with me about it, and she refused. I have a number of gay friends. I've asked them, and they've also said, you know, and we live in Berlin, as in Berlin is understood to be quite open, sexually speaking. Whenever I've attended the Christopher Street Day parade, it's being packed, people everywhere, all sorts of colors represented. But whenever I've spoken with people from the community and I've asked them how things are, and they say, yeah, every year it gets worse and worse. You see, the people don't really know. Okay, there are very unfortunate cases, as you mentioned, one or two of earlier, but people really have no idea. Coming out of the clubs where these communities frequent, so often people get abused verbally, some are beaten up, attacked, objects thrown at them. This kind of thing happens hundreds of times a year. And it, as you say, just going to a club, just going to a community event in itself requires a lot of courage.
Yes, it does.
And then to be thrust suddenly into this situation where just going to work can cause terror for people. I mean, I deal with, on Monday mornings, whenever I speak with people, when we're just going to work for normal reasons, they're, oh man, I don't want to be here. I don't want to go to work. If you add to that the terror, which you've just referred to, that a trans person may feel going to work on any day, I mean, it's horrific. It is terrorism. Of course. What else could it be?
Exactly. And it's not just about going to work. They've got to leave the house. They've got to get to work. So you've got like public transport, and depending on where you are in the country or in the world, that can be horrific all by itself for so many reasons, but especially so for anybody who's trans and non-binary. And within that demographic, people from ethnically diverse backgrounds, you see countless videos of people from all margins being horrendously harassed and hurt physically or verbally abused for so many reasons. So they've got to get to work, and then they get to work, and maybe they've been told that they can keep their job, but they aren't allowed to use the bathroom that they would normally be allowed to use. And then they've got to sit while somebody maybe a few rows down is glaring at them because they know that they're trans now, if they weren't frequently out before. So they've got to try and get through that work day, concentrate on their work whilst being afraid of that person, maybe not, like wondering what's going to happen if I end up being alone with that person. There are so many reasons why it's like they are going to have to run a gauntlet just to get to work. And then when they get to work, they've got to run another one. And then they go home, got to get home again safely. And they get home and they might be able to breathe for a little bit. And then it starts all over again. And people just do not get that at all. And so, because this has exploded in such a massive way, and the way that it's grown and evolved over the last 12 years has been very deliberate, because it's not just like the hate groups as well. It was a couple of years ago, Mary Black, who is an amazing queer woman who has stood up for the trans community on so many occasions, at one point said that there are bad faith actors on TERF sides and on our side of the community, because they are the people, they put plants in the community on both sides. There is absolutely, without shadow of a doubt, bad faith actors. And then there was a massive influx of Russian bots on Twitter before that particular oligarch bought it to fuel, because they were pretending there were bots that were being promoted as being trans people, and the accounts were all new, or they had maybe one or two tweets, and it was basically threatening TERFs or anybody who might be that way inclined, nasty things, just to stir up hate and anger and controversy. So it wasn't even real engagement, but it worked. It worked. So now trans people, non-binary people may well just have to stay indoors to be safe. And we got here because of a group of selfish people who grew to be part of a community made up of so many different horrible demographics that came together just so that they could punish a small amount of people, rather than turning around and dealing with the actual problem. And that's where we are.
What you said there reminded me a bit of the police advice during the search for the Yorkshire Ripper.
Yeah.
When they said, women, don't go out on your own. Go out with a man.
Mm-hmm.
Take a man with you. And women at the time were horrified. They'd just gone through this period of independence and women's empowerment and so on. And then they were being told by the authorities that you can't do what you want to do on your own just because of this one man, that you can only go out with another man. And that's the only way you can have fun. And it's so similar with, unfortunately, what you're saying here is that people from the trans community are basically being told one way or another, you're free to be trans, but do it at home.
Yeah. There's a lot of people in the TERF collectives that actually don't want people to be, they actually despise us on a level that I've never seen. Like, some people will say, oh no, just keep it behind closed doors and we'll leave you alone. Just stay away from everybody ever and we won't bother you. And then there are people within it, the really extreme people that are like, no, we don't want you to exist. We really, really absolutely love you on a horrendous level. And most of those people that hate us on that level are men. And a lot of that hatred actually comes from the incel community as well, which is another conversation. But yeah, it's just I find myself lost for words a lot of the time, and I have to sit and think about things. But this ruling, I'm hoping that it gets overturned, that we can fight it and we can restore the rights and the faith in our community that we may previously have had. Because the thing is, I was hoping that we would have made more progress over the last decade or so in the trans community and the non-binary community here and overseas. And to be truthful, from my observations, it may vary from other people's vantage point. Not only have we not made any progress, we have gone backwards.
Yep. I feel that way too, unfortunately. And I'm nowhere near as well informed as you, but I get the sense of that from all the things that I've read and the people that I've spoken with, unfortunately.
They just don't want us to exist. They will deny that we exist, that we are all delusional. I think that they would probably have us institutionalized if they could, because after this Supreme Court ruling, one of the other headlines that I saw in a UK paper, I can't remember which one, was that they were going to start looking at correlation with teens and younger adults, any kids that may have started to talk about trans issues anywhere, being compared with people in the autistic community. Now, I am autistic and I also have ADHD. And so I'm like, right, okay, well, they'd find me, obviously, because, that's just the way it is. But it's like, well, hang on a minute. Why are you comparing? Why can't you just leave us alone? Okay. So even if a majority of people who are trans or non-binary or intersex or any gender identity that differs from norms, if we are all autistic, so fucking what? So fucking what? Because some of us, in fact, the majority of us are fucking brilliant, to be quite honest. And I mean, no, we have got some seriously brilliant people, but they've been bogged down with bullshit like this.
Yep.
It's like, come on, just give it a rest for 5 minutes, go outside and get some sunshine, go and gaze at your navel in a field rather than being horrific to trans people online. And, you've literally affected change for us now. Well done. What do you want us to do now? Do you want us to fade away and die? Yeah, that's the answer, I think, from a lot of people, a lot of TERFs. They will say that. Look, they don't give a shit about us. They would be happy for us to just disappear. And that's the crux of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is the crux of it. That's where it comes down to. And I know that some will deny that. No, that's not what we want at all. We just want to create safe spaces for women. But to be honest, I haven't met anybody from the LGBT community who doesn't agree with that. I think all of the people who I've spoken to from that community, and there are a number, have always said, absolutely, women should feel safe everywhere.
Yeah, they should. And here's the thing. I mean, what this comes down to is the bathroom argument. And this law coming to pass because of this stupid bathroom argument. Because, really, all trans people want to do is go and use the bathroom and then wash their hands and leave, maybe to put makeup or whatever, brush their hair, just like everybody else. Like, I don't want to hang out in public toilets on purpose. No. And you often see TERFs wandering into bathrooms with their camera on. I'm like, hang on a minute. You're in here with a camera and we're the problem.
Yeah.
Seriously. Right. Okay. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And I just wish that they'd get some help. And and I say that not because I'm implying that they're all completely insane. I'm not. But to have that much hatred inside for a demographic that doesn't wish you any harm it's ridiculous.
Which brings us to the question that we also wanted to address, which is about what people can do to help. Because as you've said, the trans community is terrified. You also mentioned before that the similarities with Section 28. What are the support mechanisms in place to either help people through their mental health issues that they may be having because they feel they are being denied their rights as humans? They are being denied their dignity as humans. What support mechanisms are in place? Where can they go?
Okay, so one of the things that the trans and non-binary communities are good at is rallying around each other when we need it. It's not necessarily across the board, because unfortunately some of us hate ourselves so much that we hide away or we don't talk, but we are very, very good at looking after one another. And there are websites out there that have, like, so for example, when I read out the Supreme Court ruling, but it was the TLDR version, that came from a website called Queer AF. And if I tried to read the link out, I'd probably make an absolute mess of it. So as I say, I will give you a bunch of links at the end.
Yep.
There are lots of smaller trans organisations that operate in areas all around the country, and they are quite easy to find because they make themselves easy to find in that respect. And it's a lot of that's been represented because there have been protests from the trans and non-binary community in recent weeks since this ruling. And they're making it known, like, this is where you can go if you need help. This is who you can talk to, you can reach out to. There's a website, a radio station that I listen to called Gadio, and they are very trans positive. If you are looking for an organisation that supports trans people as part of the larger LGBTQ community, because unfortunately, like I said to you before, there are parties within our own communities that aren't being supportive. So Gadio is inclusive. It's an inclusive radio station, and they advertise helplines and resources online all the time. There's also a smaller organisation that I think is still developing, but it has developed well. It's Trans Radio UK, and I think they have like a helpline as well, although I think it's certain times of the day, because I think it's only run by one person at a time. We tend, as I said, we tend to look at ourselves when it comes to organising and supporting one another. But one of the biggest things that you can do right now is that we need cis allies more than ever. And a lot of people, because looking at everything that's been going on, I have noticed a lot of cis people speaking up in support of us, and that is absolutely brilliant. And we need more of that. But what we actually need you to do is step up physically as well. And when I say that, I mean wear trans positive badges or pins that are, visible. If you want to wear trans positive t-shirts, things like that, you can do that. You can buy them from small queer outlets so that you can be sure that you're supporting a trans person as well as wearing it outwardly. So you're giving them funds to keep going, because if people lose their jobs or they can't get a job because they're trans, they have to fund themselves. Yeah. And that opens them up to all different types of work. And some of it is creating pro-trans and pro-LGBT stuff. One of the big ones for me certainly is to say or to show a trans or non-binary person, or not just us, disabled people, as across the board, because we have disabled trans people as well, or anybody that doesn't fit into cis white gender norms, to show them that you are a safe person to ask for help. Yeah. And there are people who have released pins like "You are safe with me" or something along those lines. But something that I'm trying to do at the moment is get a line of designs out with the phrase "I can go with you" or "I will go with you," which would signify that you are a person, that a trans person is safe to ask for help. I have taken trans people to the bathroom myself as a non-binary person because they were afraid to go in by themselves. Yeah. So it may very well be that if you are in a position, if you can see somebody that needs help or somebody asks you for help, be prepared to step up and do it for them. It might not be taking them to, like going to a bathroom. It might be saying, right, I just need somebody to walk with me to the other side of this building because I'm afraid there's a group of people there that are looking at me weird. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Show us and step up for us. If we look afraid or we ask you for help, do it gently, do it kindly. Don't grill us for information, but show us that you will be there for us, because we need you now more than ever. And right now, that's the information that I've got for you. I haven't mentioned a lot of links specifically outside of mentioning Queer AF, Gadio, and Trans Radio UK, because, as I said, there's a lot of links to mention. But I will make sure that you've got a list of places that are there for people to look at, and also if they just want to learn anything. Because, as you know, if you're a new person to any of this, you might be thinking, where the bloody hell do I start? What do I do? You know, and if they can always come and ask me directly on Mastodon if they want to, but that depends if they want to join Mastodon, you know, because that's another thing that, you know, social media has changed so much because of all of this, and, you know, due to all of this, to the point where the social media owners do not give a single fuck about any of us.
Yeah. I will be very grateful to you for sharing a list of those links. And but on top of that, I think, as you mentioned a couple of times really in our chat, there are a number of different topics that are offshoots as well that really should be discussed in more detail. And I think we should. And I would love to have you come back and we can address those issues as well one by one.
More than happy to do that. More than happy to do that. I mean, I wasn't sure whether or not I'd be invited back, but hey, there we go.
There you are.
No. But no, I'm more than happy, because there are things that intersect. And like I said, this doesn't just affect trans people at all. It doesn't. It affects everybody. But so many people just aren't getting it. They're just listening to all the dog whistles and stuff like that. So it's an absolute disaster. But yeah, I'm more than happy to come back and talk about those subjects. There are lots of activists around, and I've purposely not mentioned them because I don't want... The trouble is, when trans subjects come to light, there is an unfortunate side effect that people might get piled on. So I don't particularly want to have that happen to anybody. And going back to... You mentioned that you'd asked for, again, a lesbian person to come on the podcast, and they declined. There are tons and tons of reasons for them not to do it, because it might not be safe, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I agree. Unfortunately, I agree. Yeah.
It is unfortunately not safe for them. But for me, the biggest kind of betrayal really is people from within the LGBTQIA community that are TERFs. It genuinely breaks my heart. And I'm just like, but you know what this feels like. You know what this feels like. Why? Why don't you want the same for us?
Yeah.
You know, we want to be able to join up with you and be together. You know, I don't mean like in a romantic relationship point of view, just like be represented together. But at the moment, we don't know if we can come into your spaces at all, because we don't know if you're inclusive or not. Because unfortunately, they don't always make it clear. Organisations don't necessarily make it clear. Some do. They go, no, you are welcome here, 100%. But if you can't find anything on a website that's run by an LGBTQ community, and it hasn't got anything on there about it being inclusive, then that's a problem. So you can approach them and say, hey, are we welcome here? And then they might come back with a page full of word salad to say, no, you're not. And I'd like to see the end of that, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But I guess we'll find out, really.
We will indeed. And to be honest, I mean, a key part of all of this is engaging directly in debate and not throwing stones on social media, especially when you have a platform. People have to realize, or everybody involved in the discussion is a human being. And that comes with it the understanding of respect, dignity, and human rights. And unfortunately, too often that is forgotten about, and that is thrown aside because of whatever short-term popularity and so on. Let's talk about the issues. Let's bring the different sides together. You know, let's be open about it, and then maybe these issues will be overcome. But I've thoroughly enjoyed our talk, Alex, and
it's been great.
You said that you were a very good talker, and I can only agree with that in its most positive sense.
Well, I mean, I can talk for Britain. It's not necessarily that I'm good at it. I can do it. I don't know whether I do it well, but I guess we're about to find out.
Well,
You know?
I've definitely enjoyed it, and as I said, and as you've also accepted, it's wonderful. We will talk again, and yeah, we'll see how many of these episodes that we could produce. So thank you very
Quite a
much,
lot.
Alex.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and I definitely want to do it again.
Fantastic, and I look forward to it. All the best.
All right, you take care.
Two and a mic.